Welcome everybody for another lecture in the QCI series on AI and data science for COVID-19. Today we have a lecture on the flattening the curve of the COVID-19 infodemic. It'll be given by three scientists from QCRI. Like before, let me quickly go through the house rules. So when you join the lecture, all attendees, your microphones are muted, and only the host can unmute them. But we strongly encourage you to ask questions by typing them in the Q&A window on your right-hand side. And periodically, I'll stop the speakers and I'll ask them to answer the questions, or I'll perhaps wait till the end, depending on the question, for them to answer them. And at the end, all the speakers will also stay back and take more questions. So we really encourage you to ask as many questions as possible and try and make this interactive. We've had several lectures before, and after today, there's one lecture today, and then next week on May 18th, we will not have a lecture, but we'll have hopefully a very exciting panel. The title will be Responding to the Global Crisis in the Age of Data and Information Overload. And several scientists from QCRI, and including Dr. Ashraf Abudnaga, he'll be on the panel. So today's lecture is, as I mentioned, it's a very nice phrase that has been coined, infodemic. So it's flattening the curve of the COVID-19 infodemic. And there'll be three speakers, Dr. Kareem Darwish, who's the principal scientist and acting research director of the ALT group, QCRI, Dr. Preslav Nakov, who's the principal scientist at QCRI, and Dr. Giovanni Martino, who's a scientist from QCRI. And they're heavily into this area, and we hope to hear something interesting and exciting from them. So over to you, Kareem. Thank you.
Good morning. Can I get to share my screen? Okay. Okay, so you should be able to see my slide at this point in time, correct?
Almost there. Yeah, now we see it, yes.
Okay, fantastic. So this is the great team that I work with. This is Arabic Language Technologies group, and I think you'll hear from two of my colleagues also from the same group, Dr. Preslav, Nakov, and Dr. Giovanni later on. So what I'll be talking about today is the politicization of the COVID-19 situation in the US. And let me just start with just a quick motivation. I really encourage everyone to try to keep the slides as big as possible on your screen, because I'm going to be going through many examples, and it would be easy for people to actually see some of the writing that I'll be showing. So let me start here with a simple question. Is COVID-19 really a health issue? And before I answer this question, I want you to look at this tweet. Just take, 5 seconds, 7 seconds to read it. So it's talking about how Trump blocked coronavirus testing in January to aid his re-election chances by keeping US infections figures low. Here is another one. And here it says, thank God Donald Trump is the one in charge during the scourge. So it seems that people are not just discussing, COVID-19 as a health issue, but actually as something completely different. And it seems that Donald Trump has a lot to do with what people are actually discussing concerning the COVID-19 situation. So let me give you a bit of background on what's happening. I'm sure all of you are following the news. So the US is the hardest hit country by COVID-19 at this point in time. As of 2 days ago, the number of infections in the US has skyrocketed beyond 1.3 million, and the number of confirmed deaths are actually more than 80,000. So the situation is actually pretty bad. So it is really a huge public health issue in the US. So before I actually answer this question, is it really a health issue? Let me tell you something about something called framing. So framing basically is a way to actually focus our perception or attention on something when we're actually making a judgment about something. And framing is affected, it works on three levels. It works at the level of what we know about the world, what is mentally accessible at the point that we're making a decision, and whether we deem something as relevant or not. I want you to look at the picture in this slide. Most people, when they see it, they see a duck. However, when it's around Easter time, most people see a rabbit. So basically, the Easter holiday kind of frames people's perception, because now the rabbits are more mentally accessible during the time of Easter, so they start seeing something different than what they normally see. So framing is actually quite powerful. Let me give you another example of how framing works. Can you imagine that you'll be rooting for a criminal? The answer is yes. If you've ever seen this movie, Gone in 60 Seconds, or this movie, The Godfather, during the entire movie, you're actually rooting for a criminal. And the reason why you're rooting for a criminal when you're actually watching these movies is that it was taken out of the criminal justice frame and put into other frames like family solidarity and loyalty, or saving life, or being somehow adventurous, or maybe the Robin Hood effect or something like that. So movies are very, very powerful tools for actually changing people's perception by framing the problem in a completely different way. So going back, is COVID-19 really a health issue? So the attitude of people towards the COVID-19 situation, and here I'll be talking specifically about the US situation, has to do a lot with how they frame the problem. And so what do we know, what people know, and this is called something called familiarity bias, where people are, the things that are they're more familiar with, they give them greater, they're more important in their brain, or they're more closely, aligned to what they know. Availability bias, if something is being mentioned over and over and over again, that means it takes a larger space in their brain. And what they deem relevant is actually important. So I just wanted to give just a quick recap about frames, because they become very, very important as we move on and talk about how we actually judge, or how do we analyze the question of is COVID-19 really a health issue in the US? So to do our analysis and to construct our frames and so forth, we needed data. And one of the most accessible ways to actually get data is through Twitter. So we wanted to get tweets that are about COVID-19 and somehow related to US users who discuss politics. And the second thing is, once we get all these tweets, is that we identify users as being Republican or Democrat. And during the time that I'm actually going through the slides, you'll hear me say, words like GOP, which is actually stands for Grand Old Party, which is the Republican Party, or the DNC, which is the Democratic National Committee, and this refers to Democrats. So I'll be using Democrats and DNC, Republicans and GOP kind of interchangeably as I go forward. So what we did was we collected about 30 million tweets from March 5th to March 31st. And these are things that were related to Corona, like Corona outbreak, coronavirus, and COVID-19, and so forth. We filtered the tweets on English, and then we filtered the tweets yet again to find people who actually mentioned the coronavirus, plus something that was related to politics, such as Republican or Democrat, Trump and Biden, and so forth. And what I told you before, we wanted to find users who have they express political affiliation and at the same time talk about the COVID-19 situation. So we got the 30,000, the top 30,000 most active users where they're actually retweeting the most, mentioning COVID-19 plus something related to politics. We went back and got their timeline tweets, and we retained all the tweets between January 1st and April 12th, which is kind of the period of the study. Before January 1st, no one was really talking about COVID-19, except very, very little. And as we shall see in a bit, people actually didn't actually start talking actively about the topic probably until mid-February or so. So all the tweets that fit during this period was about 92 million tweets, and of them, about 19 million of them actually talk specifically about COVID-19. Okay. So now we got the data. We found users who are active, who express explicit, perhaps, party affiliations, and at the same time talking about the current coronavirus outbreak. So the next step is actually to identify which people are Republican and Democrat, so we can see actually the difference. So I'm going to be talking about something called stance detection. If you've never heard what this means, let me just give you a quick definition so we're on the same page. So stance detection, basically, you're trying to identify how a person feels or thinks about a particular issue or entity. So some of the popular topics in the US is things like gun control. I have a question, a couple of tweets here where somebody is saying, it passed, the Dems are coming for our guns. And somebody on the Democratic side says nearly 40,000 Americans lose their lives because of guns. Clearly, both these folks have diverging or completely contradictory stances on the topic of gun control or gun rights. And Ilhan Omar, which he made some remarks some months ago, same thing, where basically people are taking positive view of the person or a negative view of the person. So stance detection is basically trying to find out how a person feels about a particular topic. And I just want to say very clearly that stance detection is not sentiment analysis. Sentiment analysis is just basically you're just expressing sentiment, and you can have something where you have a positive stance, but actually negative sentiment, where it's here's an example where you say, I feel bad he lost. So feel bad and lost are negative sentiment words, but the person is actually expressing a positive stance towards the person that lost. And you can have the reverse situation where you say, I'm so glad he bought the farm. And bought the farm is an idiom for saying that a person actually died. So glad and bought and they are kind of positive things, but the overall stance that the person is actually it has a negative stance toward the person who actually died. And the good thing about stances that on major issues, people's stances are kind of durable over time. So if you're a Barcelona fan, most likely you're going to continue to be a Barcelona fan for the next couple of years, unless they do something really spectacular. Spectacularly bad. And if you're a Republican, you're likely to continue to be Republican for at least a few months or a few years. And if you're a Democrat, you're going to do the same thing. So the thing is, going back, so stance is not sentiment. It's about how a person feels towards an issue or towards an entity. And usually these stances are kind of durable over time, which is actually good in the sense that this actually aids our analysis quite a bit. So again, so why do we do stance detection? It's very useful for many things. Like for example, we can actually figure out how people feel about topics. So this can help in polling and marketing. People who are ideologically similar have similar preferences. You can actually do subgroup, segmentation, or you can segment populations to discover intersecting communities and all sorts of things. And in the case of the thing that I'm going to be showing you today, it's going to be very helpful in identifying the frames by which we actually look at the politics of COVID-19 in the US. So how do we do sense detection? I'm not going to bore you with lots of technical details. I'll actually go with cartoons as much as I can. So take a couple of seconds to read the cartoon. So all of us have heard the term birds of feather flock together. And this is something called in social psychology, it's called homophily, where people who are like-minded tend to congregate around each other. And there's another, phenomena that people know in social psychology called social influence or social pressure. So if you're walking down the road and you see people looking up, then you'll naturally look up because this is, you're under immense, social pressure to do the same. And if you are actually in a group, this effect becomes more magnified. So people who hang around people who are like them they start being influenced by the people around them. And soon enough, they start forming so-called echo chambers, where it feels like everybody is talking to themselves. They're not actually talking to themselves, but everybody is saying kind of the same thing over time. And then they start listening to very similar things. So in echo chambers, close communities share socially confirming content from similar sources. Because if you say something that is divergent from what the rest of the people or the rest of the group thinks, people would look at you in a way that is negative, and they actually may kick you out. So people want to be socially conforming to their group, so they kind of start saying similar things, they start citing similar sources and so forth. And this actually becomes important in the way that we actually do sense detection. So this is, I'm sorry for the cartoons are gone for now. They'll come back later on, so just stay tuned. So what we've developed inside our group is we developed something called unsupervised sense detection. And unsupervised meaning that we don't actually need any training data to actually, to do actually sense detection. We don't actually need examples of Republicans and Democrats before we start, so we can actually identify that somebody is a Republican or a Democrat. And the way we do it, based, as I told you, that people are sharing socially conforming or socially confirming content. So if you look at user one that I have here in the slide, he's retweeting Fox News, Trump War Room, Breitbart News, and Mike Pence. And it doesn't take a genius to know that this guy would be a Republican. And the second user is retweeting Joe Biden, MSNBC, Washington Post, Kamala Harris, and Move On and so forth. Again, not a surprise that this person is a Democrat. So we construct vectors for every user based on the accounts that they retweet. We compute the similarity between the users. And based on this similarity, we actually project the users onto a lower dimensional space. In this case, we're using a 2D space. And once we actually project into a lower dimensional space, then clustering becomes actually fairly easy. I mean, if you want to go back, I have a link. I mean, here's the name of the paper is below the slide. I can actually send you the stuff if you want to, if you want later. But basically, if you try to do clustering in high dimensional spaces, it's not so effective. But when you do projection, it actually works pretty well. And the accuracy of this approach is well beyond 95%. So we're getting actually most of the users correctly. Okay. So in applying this technique to our data, where I told you we had 30,000 users, we had the timeline tweets for them. We ran this through our code, and we were able to identify the stances of more than 25,000 of these users, which is actually pretty good, and the accuracy is actually pretty high. And if you actually see when we plotted the two groups of users in the two-dimensional space, you can actually see that there, that polarization here is actually quite extreme.
So Kareem, you said you accuracy, but it's unsupervised. So what was your notion of accuracy here? Or?
So basically, the purity of clusters. So basically, if I say that this cluster is composed of Democrats, that means that at least 95% of the users in this cluster are actually Democrats.
And you had that information, or
yeah. Okay. So now that we've actually told you, we collected the data, we have the stance detection. Now we can go forward and start looking at frames. And GOP, which is the Republican frames, versus DNC, which is Democratic frames. So basically, we looked at all the tweets from the period between January 1st, to April 12th. And this we intentionally excluded all COVID-19 hashtags. So we actually are looking at things that are not not related to the COVID-19 situation, but things that actually may frame people's thinking. I know there's lots, there's so many things going on in this slide, but I just want you to notice a couple of things. If you look at this large blue cluster here, it says that 20% of the hashtags from Republicans were about conspiracy theories. And another 18% was about blaming China. And then, a little bit less about things that are actually supporting Trump. If we look at the Democratic side, we find that 57% of the hashtags were actually anti-Trump. And we will see examples from here. If we actually kind of bucket all these different, things together, we will find that there are major frames across both groups. So there's a blame frame. So in the case of Republicans, they are diverting blame on conspiracy theories, like, for example, Bill Gates is conspiring to infect people, and this is a Chinese virus, and fake news is enemy of the people, and so on and so forth. And also, there's this. If you've ever heard of this hashtag QAnon, this is a huge conspiracy theory that the deep state in the U.S. is actually working to undermine Trump at every direction. And if we look at the Democratic frame, there's also a blame frame where basically they're actually blaming Trump, like they're calling it Trump virus. Where are the tests? And they're actually blaming the GOP for the situation at hand, and all kind of even the right-leaning media, like GOP genocide and things like this. And then the second frame is kind of a support for their own little candidate. So the Republicans are obviously supporting Trump, and the Democrats are actually supporting Democratic candidates like Joe Biden, and they have things like vote blue no matter who, and Biden 2020 and so forth. And if you look at the Republican side, they have Make America Great Again, Trump 2020. And if you've never heard of this CAG hashtag, CAG stands for Keep America Great 2020. Okay. And then to a much lesser extent, things about social messaging and actual public health frames that you would care about. But the majority of the frames are about blame and supporting candidates. And if you can see all of these, if you look at the blame and the support of the candidate, there could be, highly related to the November 2020 elections, where Trump is going to be going through the election cycle and the Democrats are trying to unseat Trump.
So a question came up, which is, why is PPP in the category of blame Trump? Is it a shortage of PPPs or?
So PPP is personal protective equipment, and basically the Democrats were complaining that there was, that the Trump administration is not providing sufficient protective equipment for healthcare workers. It's actually one of their main points of attack. So there's lots of blaming going on. So it's saying that the virus, Trump is the reason why the virus spread, and blaming Trump again for because of the lackluster response to the situation. So how does this reflect on on actual life? So I just what we did was given the tweets now that about COVID-19 specifically, we divided the hashtags according to how polarizing they are, and we use something called the valence score to actually figure out whether something is highly polarizing, moderately polarizing, and so forth. And this is done for both parties. And as you can see, again, this reflected whenever COVID-19 is being mentioned. If you look on the Republican side, the most polarizing things have to do with conspiracy theories that China is behind it. There's a deep state, thing going on, and all the media is fake news. And even if you get to something more moderate, again, you see, moderately biased, you'll see something which we talked about later on, which is hydroxychloroquine. And this actually becomes quite interesting to see how both groups actually view this kind of thing, and then less, biased things. And at the same time, if you look at the Democratic side, the most biased things like, even though we're still talking about the COVID-19, you get things like Trump lies about coronavirus, Trump genocide, Trump lies Americans die, Trump, and so forth, right? And you can see that there's, it's strongly, I mean, this view that of blaming Trump and thinking about the re-election and supporting the DNC on the Democratic side, and on the Republican side, calling this all a conspiracy, and somebody else is to blame, and we need to support our candidate, and we need to keep America great, and so forth. All of this is actually also pushing the discourse concerning the COVID-19 situation. So it is actually framing how people look at this problem. So to a great extent, they're not looking at it as a public health issue, but they're looking at it as a political issue to a great extent, mostly related to the re-election campaign. And you can actually see from the hashtags that I've actually mentioned here in the slide. And if you look, and also we plotted, how polarized tweets are over time. And as you can see, the really, really dark color, the darker the color, the more polarizing it is. You can see that more than 50% of the tweets are actually highly polarizing. And only this area in the middle with the light colors are the ones that are kind of more neutral. But the ones at more than 50%, oftentimes the tweets are actually polarizing. They're actually talking, they're attacking the other side, and so forth. Okay. So we can see the progression of polarization over time in this manner. We can actually see also this is a plot of the top 10 hashtags over time. These were the 10 hashtags that were most mentioned by the Republicans, for example. Again, the same thing. The frames are actually pushing the hashtags that we're seeing. Wuhan coronavirus, the deep state, conspiracy, Trump 2020, keep America great. And the same situation again, these are the top 10 hashtags for the DNC over time. Again, you see the same thing, Trump virus cover up, Trump pandemic. So this is also pushing, I mean, the frame is actually pushing people, the hashtags that are the most popular amongst the people who are on the Democratic side. And then these frames start reflecting on really, really interesting things. And I'll go back here to cartoons. Sorry for the cartoon is a little bit small, but if you look at this one, this is saying that the Chinese government was intentionally spreading the coronavirus worldwide. This is Xi Jinping saying, "Don't worry about the coronavirus, everything is under control." So obviously, this is on the Republican side. If you look at the Democratic side, it's blaming, Trump for stopping Obamacare during the time of the pandemic, and this is criticizing Trump for the reopening plan, saying that he's going to send everybody off a cliff. So it's affecting the political cartoons. Again, the framing of COVID-19 becomes highly politicized. I'm sorry for too many things here, but you can only just read the first tweet from each one. So I'm actually looking at hydroxychloroquine. What do people think about it? So I mean, it doesn't really matter what you think about a drug. I mean, because somebody's going to run actually a clinical trial and figure out whether it works or works. If it works, good. If it doesn't work, they look for something else. But that doesn't seem to be the case, right? So if you look on the left side, it says, do not listen to 45, meaning to President Trump, when he suggests untested hydrochloroquine to treat COVID-19. And it's going to kill you, and it's terrible, and so on and so forth. And if you look at the right side, these are the Republicans saying, hydroxychloroquine rated top drug by doctors in front line of COVID-19. So even the view about things that are supposed to be kind of objective, right? I mean, it's a drug, for crying out loud. Somebody's going to actually run a clinical test and figure out. That became polarized and politicized. And the view of people towards a drug now is framed by, whatever thing that they're actually thinking about at that time, probably the election of Trump.
So Kareem, a question came was, how do you verify that these are real people tweeting?
So that's a good question. So in this study, we did not, run like a bot or not or things like this. This is something that, yes, bots are kind of are real things. We suspect that the number of bots, at least from the 2016 election, that they will probably cover around 15 to 20% of the tweets at most. but not every tweet. So I mean, we should be able to get a significantly good signal from the rest of the users who are not bots.
Another question was, sorry, given that you selected the top 30K tweeter, do you think that maybe you're looking at pundits that are by nature partisan? So is there some kind of selection bias happening in your how you selected the tweets?
So there is some selection bias. That's just a fact of life. So I mean, we intentionally looked at people who were talking about COVID-19 and potentially expressing party loyalty. So this is not a random set of every American on the street, right? So that's just as a fact of how the data was collected. But even given that, so we are looking at people who are politically active, and for people to be politically active, like for example, should they allow people to eat bagels, on Monday afternoon? This is not really a political issue. So if it was not so super politicized by either group, then we should have seen something a bit more mellow in the treatment of the issue. So we're actually, as you said, given the selection bias that we have, we actually looking at people who are specifically, express party affiliation. Whether that we have 30,000 pundits in the U.S., I don't think that's the case. And actually,
but is there a way that you could have, the people who are generally not partisan, have they become polarized because of this issue? Is there a way to check for that? So somebody who say tweets about like sports, not politically active, and suddenly they got polarized one way or the other. Is there and COVID, tweeting about COVID made that. Is there any evidence of that, or?
This is an interesting question. I think we haven't done this in this work particularly, but I think it's doable. So we can actually pick out people who just random folks who talk about the COVID-19, who actually just say that they're from the US, and then and have them as a control group. This is something that's interesting to do.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so as I told you here, that the political framing is actually framing how people think about a potential drug. And what's more interesting is it reflects on how people even view death. So if you look at how the GOP are actually looking at the situation, they're saying, oh, everybody who's dying now is being said that they're going to be, COVID-19, they died because of COVID-19. So somebody's actually inflating these numbers. So since they're inflating the numbers, because it's part of a big conspiracy against the government, to say that they're ineffective. And if you look at at the DNC side, they're claiming, oh, there are many people who are dying of COVID-19 that aren't being counted, and they're not being counted because the government wants to look good. So even in death, the politicization of the issue still exists. Okay, so this is going to be my last slide. So what I've shown you thus far in this, in my slides, hopefully that I was able to show you, is that that we can actually use Twitter as a very good lens to study social and political phenomena that we're seeing. This requires some understanding of social science theories and having state-of-the-art tools like what I've shown you, like Census Action, for example. And and as far as the specific case that I've showed you here, basically we looked at political frames where they're actually shaping how people perceive reality and facts. And when you have things where have frames shaping reality in this way, you get to something called motivated reasoning, where if a person sees the world through a particular frame, they will try to twist reality to fit their frame, whether it actually fits it or not. And this is it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Just one question before coming to Preslav. Is there do you see a new computer science research issues emerging from analyzing the the COVID phenomena, in the sense that, okay, now, like stance detection or, is interesting machine learning or AI problem. Have you thought about new problem now that you have this COVID data set, new problems in new research problems in computer science or in machine learning emerging from this?
Yes. So basically, one of the interesting problems that we continuously face is that we have to rely on hashtags, and relying on hashtags, so you can get something very highly polarizing without having a single hashtag. And at this point in time, we miss it. And what we would like to do is to go after and say, can you just rely on the content by itself? And this is not so easy, because that means you have to do some sort of topic extraction. You need to do some sort of representation of the text of what people are saying, away from the hashtags that we're seeing. So this is an interesting line of work there.
Okay. Thank you very much. Preslav. There are some more questions. I'll ask them in the end.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thanks everybody for joining. Okay, let me try to share my screen. Do you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to tell you about the COVID-19 infodemic and how Tambi, the system that we are developing here in QCRI, in collaboration also with partners from MIT and others, fights the COVID-19 infodemic. So first of all, when things come into disinformation and so on, people talk about fake news. And so the question is, what is really fake news? I mean, there's no clear definition, but kind of, if you see something like this, COVID-19 farce exposed, vaccines, 5G, Bill Gates and everything. So kind of, this is a nice example. It has it everything. So it has the vaccines, it has the 5G, it has Bill Gates and so on and so forth. So this is kind of conspiracy theories, and this is something that is potentially harmful. And this is something that would qualify. But if you see an example like this, by the way, do you guys see my full screen? Because I see a little bit of, you see my full screen? You should. Okay. So if you see something like that, Trump delays Easter to July 15 to keep promise on coronavirus, that's actually from The Onion. Obviously, this is funny. Is this something that is fake news or not? Well, that's not clear, right? This is kind of satire. According to the rules, for example, of Facebook, this is protected speech. So yeah, it's not exactly. I mean, one key difference between this one and this and the previous one is that here there's some malicious intent, and here probably not. He's just like about making fun. So I'm happy that I don't like the term fake news, because it misleads people to focus on the fact whether something is true or not. And I'm very happy that, at least in the European Union level, people talk about disinformation. And disinformation is something that is both false and intends to do harm. And again, there has been too much focus on whether something is true or not. But I think that the intention to do harm is much, much more important. And here you can see in this slide is kind of a famous slide by First Draft. So misinformation is something that is just false, but doesn't really intend to do harm. And it's kind of not so interesting. And of course, I can also do disinformation. I can do harm with real information. For example, I can hack your email. I can get some information from there, I can expose it. And it actually can be true, but I intend to do harm. And actually, the intention to do harm, in my view, is much, much more important. And I'm a little bit upset that even some fact-checking organizations don't get it right, in my view. There's so much damage done to the health of people, or in political sense, and they're kind of wasting time on checking, is this a real image of a little rabbit, or is it kind of not real rabbit, because it's viral on social media. So I think that, the society is much better served if we focus on the intention to do harm. And we are talking a lot to journalists. we are collaborating with different journalists, and we have, for example, very close cooperation with Al Jazeera, and we are talking to others, and they are telling us, look, the best disinformation is when you tell the truth, only the truth, but not the whole truth. So the selection bias is also important, and there are also kind of different ways of putting different perspectives, and Kareem has explained a lot about framing and so on and so forth. So it's not just about whether it's true or not. To me, the primary thing is whether you intend to do harm or not, okay? And this is something that other people have realized. So Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the person who created the web, he was complaining that social media are weaponizing his creation. I mean, they are turning into a political weapon. I mean, the fact that something is false, it's only part of the problem. Tabloids, for example, have been around for years, but social media have enabled disinformation at a mass scale that is also very, very kind of micro-targeted to a specific audience based on demographics, based on location, and so on and so forth. So basically, you could receive a message that is specifically designed for you to press a specific button on you. And to look a little bit into the history, we started worrying about the fake news back in 2016 during the US presidential elections, and you know, this is how big data has been used allegedly to manipulate voters. And there have been reports that the same was done in connection to the Brexit. But they're kind of, it's not only about political elections. So there are people literally killed because of disinformation, for example, in India, because of fake news. So there's fake news, oh, this, you know, this Muslim guy has some beef, okay? And beef is a saint animal in India, and then people go and kill the guy, right? And things can go into much different scale. So for example, an official investigation by the United Nations has found that has been blaming social media for a genocide on Rohingya. So this is something of completely different scale. And there are different other aspects. So for example, there's a financial aspect of this information. And this is from 2013. This is before we started worrying about the fake news. So Syrian hackers hacked the web account. And this is something very, very serious because Associated Press, France Press, and Reuters are the three main sources of news that we get. And the impact of this, and those are the most trusted sources. Again, we are talking to journalists and they are telling us, if you are fact-checking something, if you find it confirmed by one of or two of those three top sources, then we stop fact-checking because we know those guys got it right. So it's a major thing, and it caused a major loss, as you see, 136 billion. And obviously, the third main impact of disinformation has been on people's health. And before the COVID-19 pandemic, the most vocal and the most dangerous part was anti-vax movement. And here I can show you that it had a real impact on our health. So for example, there has been 300% spike on the global measles outbreak, thanks to the use, kind of the impact of anti-vaxxers. And so last year, about a year ago, 4 countries, UK, Greece, Czech Republic, and Albania, were not anymore measles free. So measles, something that was almost eradicated by vaccines, is coming back. And then along came the coronavirus, the COVID-19, and what happened is something that also kind of Kareem was talking about. Everything went together. So the political and the health issues mixed together and elevated disinformation to a whole new scale. And people started talking about infodemic. And this is something from the MIT Technology Review, but it's not only them. It's also the World Health Organization, it's also the United Nations. And actually, if you go to the webpage of World Health Organization and you look at the top 5 priorities for the World Health Organization, the number 2 is fighting the infodemic, the number 2 in the top 5, okay? So it's a very, very serious issue. So let me kind of ask a question. Is fact-checking the solution to disinformation? So there have been a lot of fact-checking efforts that have been checking different viral claims. I don't know, whether hair dryer can cure you, or garlic, or you know, different kinds of conspiracy theories and so on and so forth. And so major fact-checking organizations like factcheck.org, for example, they have dedicated pages where they're collecting the things that they have fact-checked about the coronavirus. So is Snoops, it's another one. They have a collection. One thing that I wanted to pay attention, okay, this is the second part of the collection, but look at the number of articles, 12, okay? And I can tell you, so there are others. For example, this is Full Fact, another fact-checking organization. So the truth is that the total number of claims that a fact-checking organization has fact-checked is typically a few thousand, sometimes maybe like definitely not more than 20,000, right? I mean, something more like 10,000, 15,000 or less. Many fact-checking organizations have checked just like a few hundred. This is not about coronavirus. It's about anything that they have checked in their history, right? Obviously, this doesn't really scale. So what can you do? Well, one thing that you can do is you can do automatic fact-checking, right? So, for example, here's a system from Eurocom, from our former colleague, Paolo Papotti, which you know, can check different claims that you put here. Well, there is a limitation to this. So first of all, the manual fact-checking obviously doesn't scale. Even the automatic fact-checking doesn't really scale because you cannot fact-check every single claim in the world. There are just too many, and then they travel very fast. There was this study from 2018 that shows that fake news travel 6 times faster than truth, and they kind of go much farther. And then there was this article, which is less famous, but it shows that 50% of the spread of some very viral fake news on Twitter happens in less than 10 minutes. So basically, you have to really act very, very fast. But how do you fact check? Well, you fact check based on some information that is already available. But if there's something new about, oh, there's this bomb in this little village in this remote country, I mean, there's nothing in social media yet. There's nothing in the mainstream media yet. There's nothing in Wikipedia and so on. I mean, how do you even fact check it? Well, what you can do is you actually can focus on the source. And this is something that some websites, some organizations have realized, and I really like this line of research. So, for example, Media Bias Fact Check has a list of conspiracy pseudoscience websites. NewsGuard has a list of websites that are spreading disinformation about the coronavirus. And so the idea is when you see a news, the first thing is to check the source. And this is what journalists do as well. You tell them something, they say, okay, where is it coming from, right? Do we trust this source? So basically, even if you put something, let's say in social media or somewhere, you have to probably put a link to a website where you have an article that kind of elaborates on the disinformation, the fake news that you have put there. Now, you're not going to create a new website for every single fake claim that you are making. You're going to reuse them, which basically means that we can profile those in advance and we can be prepared. So next time you put something, I can check in my database, do I know this website? And, you know, I could have analyzed it in advance and I can tell you, you know what, this is not credible, okay? Or I can see who has spread similar claims. I mean, the same thing goes to users. This is kind of relates to the work that Kareem has been talking about. So basically, the main idea is that it's much, much easier and to me, much more promising to focus on the source, where the information is coming from. It's also important to focus on the content, and we are going to talk about it, about the language, about the way that we are being manipulated, and my colleague Giovanni is going to talk after me about this. Now let me ask you another question. Can we win the war on fake news? So it's a complex, the short answer is it's a complex problem and there's no easy solution. There are things that social media companies can do because it's happening on their platforms. There's something that governments can do. There's certain legislation that can help. For example, in many countries, certain kind of hate speech is illegal. and they're the journalists, the fact checkers, the media, the international organizations, researchers that are developing all these systems and so on and so forth. All this is important. But my favorite way to win the war is something that has been shown to win the war in a specific example. And this is information from about a year ago. It was everywhere in the news that Finland is actually winning the war on fake news. Okay. How do they do it? Well, it took them about 5 years. So after the events in Ukraine and Crimea, they kind of felt threatened. And what they did, they started a massive campaign of teaching people to realize when they're being manipulated, checking the source of images, like doing inverse image search, or kind of like being aware of very emotional language and stuff like that. And they started at all possible levels. They did this at the level of the school, but also in the universities, also kind of for all parts of the population. And this is something that takes time. It took them 5 years, but now they are saying that they are winning the war. Obviously, Finland has one of the best education systems in the world, but I'm very hopeful about that. And I think that educating users is a great way to win the war on disinformation. And this idea is not new. I mean, so for example, Joseph Goebbels, the minister of propaganda of the Nazi Germany, he was saying propaganda becomes ineffective the moment we are aware of it. So there's nothing new under the sun. We just need to find it and to expose it. So if people are aware that they are being manipulated, they are less likely to be affected by this. So back in February, I was in India, in Delhi. I was invited there for a workshop as a speaker, and I visited the tomb of Gandhi, and I found this, which I found quite interesting. This is more than 100 years ago, right? It's when he said, okay, don't listen to rumor, but if you do, don't believe it. So if you all follow this rule, I mean, rumors are going to die, and we are not going to spread it in social media. We are not going to believe it. We are not going to act based on it. So this is the best way to fight disinformation, because if we stop spreading it, then it's not going to be viral. If we stop acting based on it, then people engaged in this are going to be less interested in it. And this is what we have done in the context of the Tambi project. So we are focusing on limiting the effect of disinformation, fake news, propaganda, and media bias by making users aware of what they're reading. And there are 3 key elements that differentiate us from other similar projects. One is that we are putting this as part of a specific application, which is a news aggregator. So basically, think of something like Google News, and as you read the news, it actually gives you some additional information to put them in context. The other thing is that we are profiling media. We are profiling the source, and we are giving you background information so that you, as you read something, you say, okay, let me learn a little bit about the source. Is it credible? Is it biased on specific topics? And so on and so forth. And I'm going to show you this in a bit. And the last thing is we are looking into the language. We are looking into not only where it comes from, but we are also looking into how it is being said, because there are specific propaganda techniques that manipulators have to use in order to make us angry or emotional and so on and so forth, in order to manipulate us. And my colleague Giovanni is going to talk about this after me. Let me give you a little bit of idea about the media bias and factuality of reporting. So suppose that you read this news. Antibody tests support what's been obvious. COVID-19 is much more lethal than the flu. Okay, so this is something that, kind of appeals to your emotions, makes you scared, and it's, I'm not talking here about whether it's true or not. I'm talking here about, that this projects a specific viewpoint, right? And look at this one. We could be vastly overestimating the death rate of COVID-19. Here's why. I mean, actually, both statements can be true at the same time, but they are giving us different perspectives. And if you're reading this, you might benefit from getting a background information. Is this source always is the first source always very kind of concerned about COVID-19? And is this second source always kind of trying to downplay it, right? Or have they been different balanced? So if you kind of know that a specific source has a specific bias in one direction, you might take, you know, what you read in a different way. So what do? We are modeling both the factuality of reporting and bias of entire websites. So we are not trying to say, oh, is this claim true or not? We are not trying to say, is this news article true or not? What we are doing, we are trying to make a collective decision for an entire news outlet, and we are building media profiles. For this, the most important thing, of course, is what they publish. But we are also looking into other information, how they self-represent in their media profiles on Twitter, how people talk about them on Twitter, what bias their readers in Facebook have of this news outlet. Also, we are looking into their YouTube channels. So we are looking into not only what they say, but how they say it. Is there a lot of emotions in the language and things like that? We are looking into what is there about the target medium in Wikipedia. We are analyzing traffic information, the structure of the URL, and things like that. And I'm going to give you very briefly some examples about this. So for example, analyzing the article, where we can see is there a connection between the title and the body. Sometimes there isn't, it's just like clickbaity. What kind of language is used? Is there appeal to sentiment, to emotions, to subjectivity? What topic is being discussed? Are there kind of some specific categories like war and religion being discussed that are more polarizing? Then Wikipedia. Is there a Wikipedia page in the first place? Well, if there isn't, doesn't tell us much, but still tells us something. It might be some obscure website that somebody just created a month ago for disinformation purposes. And then what is written there? You know, they are going to tell us, oh, it's conservative. Okay, this tells us something about its bias. And then how they self-represent in Twitter. Is their Twitter account? Is it verified? How old is it? But also how they self-describe, like an Army combat vet, Crusader, Republican, take back our country, MAGA, America first. This actually tells us that there's like a right bias. It also kind of implies something about the position of this account towards COVID-19 because it has been politicized. The structure of the URL, if you see something like angrypatriotmovement.com, alternative media syndicate, 100% fed up, those are not good names for serious media. And this is something that you can detect automatically. If you can chop it into words that make sense, or abcnews.com.co, that's kind of fishy. You can look into traffic information. You can also kind of analyze YouTube channels and see the sound. And you can see, thanks to the advertisement API of Facebook, you can see the bias of the people that are reading this news outlet in connection to Facebook. And here, for example, you see that the readers of Fox News are conservative. And then we are also studying the bias with respect to specific topics, basically using the techniques that Kareem before me has described. And this gives you some idea about the bias, for example, here BBC on specific topics. And you see kind of they have like some center-left kind of bias, and in particular with respect to COVID-19, they have a left bias, which means that they are concerned about COVID-19, as opposed to the right that is typically trying to downplay it. And how does this work? Well, I mean, if you have an accuracy of 40 or an F1 measure of 19, you get to 85% accuracy at classifying websites as credible or not credible, their bias of left center right from 52 to 71, and in terms of F1 measure, it's a little bit more, and modeling all these sorts of information. One was think there's a connection. This is the media bias chart, connection between bias and factuality. So basically, the less biased you are, the more factual you are. And you see here on top, Associated Press, Reuters, Bloomberg, those are the most credible news. They're in the business of selling news to everybody else. So they try to be as neutral as possible and as objective as possible. And as you get to the extreme right or extreme left, it becomes much more important for you to show your bias, to convince people of something, rather than to be objective in terms of truth. And of course, there's like a whole spectrum in between. But there's clearly a connection between bias and factuality of reporting. And we have been playing with this. We have been like trying to jointly learn factuality and bias, and this actually helps. So now I'm going to very briefly show you Tambi in action, and then we are going to go to.
So Preslav, there's this question that Tambi will probably probably works well for established sites, but how do you classify like dynamic channels in social media and which come and go and change identity and even sometimes some information coming say about hydrochloroquine from the very verifiable source. I mean, very sort of like the White House. How do you take that into account?
So Tambi, by design, it has been. I mean, maybe if I show the let me kind of try to share. Let me see if I can do that. Do you guys see my screen? You probably do.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So Tambi is it's a news aggregator, right? So we have been primarily interested in characterizing media outlets, and we have been less interested in social media. So the main focus of Tambi are mainstream media, and again, as I said, it's still important because when you put something in social media, you typically don't have that much space there, and you typically put a link to a website, and then we come into business. We are kind of characterizing entire news outlets. So we are using social media to get information, we have been using Twitter and YouTube and Facebook to get information to help us characterize mainstream media. And to do that, we had to do a little bit of social media analysis as well. But this project doesn't really focus on social media. It's focusing on mainstream media.
But also, for example, take Medium or take even, a lot of non-peer-reviewed work is appearing on Archive and BioArchive and MedArchive. And, all that is, I mean, at least for COVID, that's having a huge impact. Is that something that you would, by just focusing on mainstream media, are you missing a lot, you think? Or
I mean,
I'm just focusing on the COVID aspect, right?
We are not necessarily focusing on mainstream media. I mean, we are focusing on any. We can take as input any website and we can characterize it, right? We can tell whether you can trust it, whether it's biased on specific topics, whether it's biased in general, things like that. This is what we do. We can also analyze one specific article in terms of the propagandistic language that is being used, and this is something that Giovanni is going to talk about, right? So kind of those are the two things. We have done work on fact-checking per se. As I said, we started with that topic. Currently, I'm trying to avoid it a little bit, especially when it comes to scientific articles. It's hard to know the objective truth, right? I mean, there are many questions that the scientists are not sure about. So how can a system be sure about? Then another problem is that would you trust this system, right? So if I tell you, oh, my AI tells me that this research article is not likely to be true, or this news article is not likely to be true with 85% accuracy, or would you trust that? I mean, imagine you are interviewing a president of some country, and then you have some real-time system that tells you, oh, he's lying now. Are you going to say, Mr. President, you are lying now? My AI tells me that you are 95% likely to be lying now. Why are you lying? You cannot do that, right? So there's a problem with how you use those systems. So one thing that we have been doing with respect to fact checking, we have been that I did not talk about, is we are looking into previously fact checked claims. So, and we are trying to check whether what is being said, maybe in a real-time interview or in a political debate or in an article, has been previously fact checked. And this is something that actually gives credibility, and this actually has the potential to revolutionize journalism, because it can put politicians right on the spot in real time. So the person is saying something, and you can imagine, on the mobile phone, the journalist says, okay, ping, okay, this has been like fact-checked by 2 different fact-checking organizations. It was found to be false. Now, based on this information, you can actually put the politician on the spot in real time. And we have just, you have a paper on this, just accepted at ACL.
Great, thank you. Okay.
Should I show you a little bit the system in action, just for like maybe like 2 minutes?
Yeah, or if Giovanni wants to go and then you come back, or it's up to you.
I think it's more kind of, it's better if I show, because he's going to show something else.
Okay.
That is, yeah, okay. So this is Tambi. It's a news aggregator. It works in Arabic, English, has some other languages. And as you read the news, you can actually click and you can get some information about the source. So for example, here I'm clicking on this and I'm getting, is it central? Is it hyper-partisan? Is it propagandistic? How many articles we have found to be very likely or very unlikely to be propaganda? The general frame of reporting. So anything, it can be Brexit, it can be the coronavirus, has different aspects. There's a probably health aspect, there's political aspect, there's an economic aspect, and so on and so forth. And we're looking from which frame the reporting is being done. And this is also related to the frames that Kareem before me was talking about. And then, do you trust them based on all this information? And what is their bias, left, center, right? What is their audience? And what is their position with respect to COVID-19? And you see that, you know, this specific source is kind of quite, you know, right-leaning with respect to the coronavirus. And then you see this distribution of articles. So we have found 76 articles that from this source that are about coronavirus, and 75 of them we found very conservative and one kind of quite conservative. And I can show you maybe for some other source, I don't know, let's say BBC. Okay. Those are kind of the media profiles. And I mean, you can go on the website, you can like look into other media. So you see quite central, you see almost no propaganda at all. It's really, really clean, 96%. And here's the frames of reporting, and you know, this kind of the factuality, we are 90% certain that the factuality is very high. And then it's kind of center, a little bit to the left. You can see this also on the 7-point scale. And then what kind of people read them in Facebook. And you see that there's slight liberal bias among the audience. And then their bias with respect to, on Twitter, with respect to specific topics. So you see there's kind of a little bit to the left, sometimes more, sometimes center. And with respect to COVID-19, they are left bias, which means that they are concerned about it. And then you see the distribution of articles that talk about coronavirus in Twitter, and how do you judge them? Kind of, you judge, you know, big part of them to be moderate, some kind of more on the conservative side, saying, oh yeah, it's probably not so dangerous, or probably should worry about the economy. And he is kind of the liberal side, which is more like, okay, we should really, you know, have strict measures, and lives of people matter the most, and things like that. So you see a little bit of both, obviously, you know, kind of some leaning to the left. And I think this is kind of very interesting and important to give you background information about what you're reading. And we have also kind of bias with respect to some other claims and things. And something else that we have, and you can go here, you can check other media, you can like, you know, type here something and, you know, and get information. Something else that you can do is we have information about specific topics. Okay. Time to come. I'll just kind of show you, okay, this is kind of I just need a few seconds. So this is a topic page about coronavirus, COVID-19, and we show you on a map who is reporting about this, and we have 100,000 articles, and you can see what are the top reporting countries in absolute and relative numbers, what are the top propagandistic countries in absolute and relative numbers, and the same for media. And then how much propaganda there is about the topic, and what are the frames from which people, kind of media, report about it. And obviously the number one is health and safety, and initially it was exclusively about this, and now you see economy and politics also emerging as important topics. Okay, I'll stop here. If they are not, yeah.
Thank you. There's some questions, I'll ask them in the end.
Oh, something that I didn't mention is that we also have, okay, can I just, okay, well, okay, I stop here.
Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Okay. I'll just go on. If you don't see my slides, just let me know.
Yeah, we can see them. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how to detect propaganda in the news. So first of all, when we talk about propaganda, what are we talking about? There is a well-established definition, says a communication deliberately misrepresenting symbols to influence its audience towards a specific goal. So already the definition gives a lot, gives some interesting clues. So one of the main components is that there's a will to influence somebody towards a specific goal. So there's an intent, an agenda, and there's a way to influence the person. So I guess all of you are kind of familiar with some of the propaganda posters, like the one on the left, famous "I Want You," that was used by the US Army. So one of the things, when people usually talk about propaganda, the term has a negative connotation, but actually from this definition, actually that is not necessarily true. For example, if you look at the figure in the middle, this is a campaign to warn against the risk of smoking for lung cancer, which is not necessarily so a negative intent. I'll talk about the third example in a bit. So those examples that I discuss, they are usually they are very old examples from an era in which the propaganda has been performed by government states, which has the control of the mass media and a large amount of resources. What has happened recently with the advent of internet and the social media is that this process has been kind of democratized. So there has been cases, for example, the 2016 election, in which even allegedly, even small organizations have been able to influence a large part of the U.S. population, and that gave rise to the research field called computational propaganda. How can it be that a small organization is able to influence even an election, for example? So there are some skills that are needed. So there's a need to have some to be able to create some bots that are able to disseminate information to a very large audience, and you need to know how to reach this large audience. So exploiting the social media. Another important aspect is the fact that a lot of social media allows you nowadays to micro-profile your user, so you know what each user is sensitive to. And obviously, one of the main things is we were talking about influencing the user. So how do you create content to influence the user? And this is the part that I'm going to talk about. So going a little bit from through the research that we have done, we have started first with kind of traditional approach. So we start by building an intelligent algorithm which was able, given a document, to say whether it was propaganda or not. So gives a score on how likely that document was propagandistic or not. And this was based on the analysis of the language, so of the style of the writer, technically speaking, character engrams, lexical features, and based on the observation that propaganda contents tends to be kind of easier to read. So we derive features based on readability and the richness of the vocabulary. So all of this, we had this, we come up with an intelligent algorithm which had quite a good accuracy. And actually, this is the algorithm that Preslav showed when that we use to aggregate information to when we plot for the plots in Tambi about the propaganda.
So Giovanni, is your definition of propaganda like sort of language agnostic or cultural agnostic, or?
I'll get to that.
Okay.
Can I answer like in 5 slides?
Yeah.
It's going to be easier to answer in 5 slides. So anyway, my definition depends on a set of techniques that are used to influence the users, and these techniques, their definition might depend on the culture of the person or of the society. Anyway, I'll try to explain it clearly later. So one problem with this algorithm, so this is very good when we aggregate information, but one problem is that obviously its accuracy is not 100%. So whenever it gives you just a score about a document, you don't know, is he making a mistake on this document or not? So you either trust him or not. So in other words, it doesn't explain how we came up with that conclusion. So it's very hard to trust it. Then this motivated us to go dig a little bit deeper into the language feature of the problem. And so what we did, we came up with a list of rhetorical techniques that are used when a person wants to influence somebody else, and then we try to detect those. So the goal, our overall goal, is for the person to avoid to be manipulated, because if we help them to recognize these techniques, so when they are being manipulated and influenced by other people, obviously that would be something positive, and that probably would promote also critical thinking. So I was talking about the techniques. We actually have 18 of these techniques. We selected 18 among the ones that are present in the literature, because these are the ones that can be found in the news. Those techniques, which are the ones you find, you see on the slides, can be divided into main categories. One category is composed of the techniques that are appealing to the emotion of the audience. For example, when you use loaded language or use name calling, so to attack your opponent, or when you use flag waving. There is a technique when you appeal to patriotism and all this high value. Another set of techniques is related to logical fallacies. For example, here we have on the bottom the black and white fallacy, which consists in giving only 2 possible solutions to a problem when there are actually more solutions possible. But you only list 2 of them as if there are only these 2 solutions. And then, of course, you undermine one of the solutions, and in this way, your user is influenced to accept the other solution, which was the one that you are rooting for from the beginning. So let's see some couple of more examples. This is the cover page of the Daily News. It's talking about the Prime Minister of Iran, and it calls him evil. Obviously, this is an instance of name calling. And this is one of the techniques appealing to the emotion. Another logical fallacies is called bandwagon, and this is exemplified here. Like when they say, would you vote for Clinton as president? 50% say yes. And the fallacy is about justifying that something is true because the majority thinks it is true, it is correct. This is the poster that was on the first slide, and this is clearly appealing to the fear of your audience. Buy war bonds before it's too late. So we tried to look into the literature, and there were no studies on that. So the first thing that we had to do was to create an annotated corpus. So we downloaded 550 articles, and we annotated with the fragments in the text that were corresponding to any of the 18 techniques. So if you look at the figure on the left side, for example, the word babies on the first row is an example of name calling. And this is also an example of the annotation. So we asked the annotators to flag the fragment. So in this case, it's just one word, and to specify which technique has been used in that fragment. So notice that things are a bit complicated because the fragments can be very long, even a full sentence, or even more than a sentence, or they can overlap in the case of exaggeration and loaded language, the one circled in red. So this is quite a hard problem. And actually, so we defined one task was exactly related to this annotation. So we asked the task was to detect both the fragments and the technique used in the fragment. But since this was a very hard task, we also defined a simpler task, which was simply given a sentence, we were to detect whether a technique was used or not in that sentence. So like this task is called SLC. And you can see on the right side, like the first row has, we call it propaganda because it has one technique, the word babies, and the second row doesn't have any, so it's negative. So this becomes a binary classification problem. And then we experimented with deep learning approaches. I will not go too much into details on this. But the approach that is most effective is the one on the top, on the bottom right. And the main idea of that approach is that he uses information from both tasks at the same time so that it can exploit a richer type of signal. So it's, in the end, it is more effective. This is a neural network that we call multi-granularity network. Okay, now I could show you some numbers with some results, but I prefer actually to show you the algorithm in action. So there's a link here to the demo. If you want to go there, https://www.tambi.org/PERTA, PRTA. I'm going to share my screen now.
So what you're showing screen, so a lot of it, like the fine-grained work that, fine-grained propaganda detection. So a lot of the effort is on getting it properly labeled, right? Your corpus.
For the corpus, yes, that was quite a challenge to have it labeled. Yes, but also the learning problem itself is a fragment. Is a multi-label problem, and each token, so each word should be can be flagged as one of the technique or not, or like even more than one technique or not. So it's quite a complicated problem, and also we have a lot of data, like 400K tokens words, but for deep learning approaches for such complicated problems, that might not be enough.
So your main contribution there was more about, were there sort of new, were there once you had it labeled, were there computational challenges? Did you have to formulate the problem differently, or was it, once it had labeled, it just became a multi-class sort of classification problem? Just curious about that.
So our contribution was, first of all, to frame the problem. the selection of the technique and so on, their definition, the annotation process, the definition of the task. The neural network that I was describing very briefly, because I didn't want to enter too much into details, is basically, we call it multigranularity because there's one network that classifies each fragment, and there's another network that classifies each sentence, and they exchange information with each other with a gate, such that they can, if one is certain of, I don't know, let's say that the sentence level one is sure that there's no technique, he sends the information to the fragment one, try to bias it towards not finding any fragment as well, and vice versa.
Okay, thank you.
So if you go, now you see my screen, right? Sorry, my browser, I hope.
Yeah, we do.
Okay. So we have a demo showing the system. This is the main page. There are two functionalities in the demo. So in the first one, we collect automatically articles about a topic and we analyze them. So far we have 4 topics. For example, if we click on coronavirus, we get to this page in which we have all the articles that we collect about coronavirus with the media outlets on the left side, and the number of articles for each media outlet that talk about they are about corona. We use the Tambi technology to collect and extract these the articles. On the right side, you can see a plot in which we compute statistics on the techniques that have been found on all the articles, in this case about of all the media outlets about coronavirus. So you can see that loaded language is the most prominent technique that has been used, and there's a lot of appeal to fear, and so on. If we go back on the left side, we can change topic, or we can filter the set of articles that we are considering. So by date, so by specifying date range or adding some keywords. Another thing that we can do, again using the technology that has been developed in Tambi, is to filter the media outlets according to their political bias. This is what Preslav was talking about. So, for example, I can only visualize only the right-leaning media, and in this case, we upload the plot on the right side is updated automatically, and you can notice that you can play a little bit with it. So there's still a lot of language, but then there's a lot of flag waving, so they appeal to patriotism and name calling and slogans. Instead, if we look at the left-leaning, there is more doubt. So name calling and doubt is prevalent in the left-leaning media side. So I guess this could be interesting to have like people that are expert in the area can make maybe more interesting findings here.
Do you suffer from the problem of like recursion? You know, you define your left using these words, and your definitions are based on these sort of implicitly on doubt, you know, or, you know, fear.
No. The political bias is defined using the algorithms that Preslav described before. So this is a different algorithm that we query. We query about the source, and we want to know whether it's left, right, leaning, and so on. And we just categorize according to the output of that algorithm. It is not done using the propaganda techniques, the analysis of the propaganda techniques. So another thing that we can do, for example, if we click on one of the media outlets, we get the same statistics for example, in this case for Fox News, and you can see they apparently they use a lot of slogans according to our system. So another feature of our algorithm, if we click, obviously when you click on Fox News, you see the list of articles, and when you click on one of the articles, You get it on the right side, the full article with the techniques highlighted. For example, in this case, there's a lot of language. This word petty, and another one here, Gabar ripped her fellow Democratic presidential, and so on. And there's a flag waving here. So you can see each color is a different technique, and also there's a number that is connected to the name of the technique on the right side. And you can check or uncheck some of the techniques, and they won't appear if you're not interested. And if you don't want to have the text too much highlighted, you can just click on at the beginning of the sentence, and you see only the list of techniques, but without showing where they are exactly. So I was saying that there is another functionality. The second one is that is it possible to submit an article to be analyzed? So far everything was automatic and it was happening. We were collecting automatically the articles, but if you click on the second part, on the submit text for analysis, you get a screen like this one. I've already pasted some text. So here you can write your own text or even copy it. You can write a URL and we'll extract the text automatically, and then you can obviously edit it. And once you're happy and you want to analyze it, you click on submit. In this case, I used a speech from Churchill in the 1940. It's called The Finest Hour. It's supposed to be a famous speech. And this is the analysis that has been done on the fly. As you can see, there is a lot of appeal to fear that is kind of scattered between different words. There are some breaks. So another feature that I haven't mentioned so far is the confidence. So our classifier has associated the confidence. So we can play with the confidence and show only the preferences that, only the annotation that have higher confidence over a certain threshold. So if you look now, as you can see, the ones that were kind of weird to look at, they were the ones that with less confidence. So using this slider, one can focus the analysis on the annotation that the system is more certain, is more confident on. Okay.
Thank you. So, Preslav, do you want to say a few? You want to wrap up? I think. Are you ready to take questions or? Thanks, Giovanni.
I have something more to say. So if you, unless there are first questions about what Giovanni said, because I wanted to change topic and kind of to tell you about something else, which is actually related to a question that was being asked about what we do about social media. And there's something quite new and interesting that we have developed, and I just wanted briefly to tell you about it. But it's like a different topic, so if there are questions for Giovanni first, might be better to ask them.
Well, there's an interesting question. It says, is propaganda like candies? Most doctors would say it has zero benefit to health, but most people would consume them anyway, especially when you're stuck at home. So.
I'm not sure I'm getting there with the health.
Is propaganda like candy?
So meaning that entertainment.
Yes.
No, I believe that he's been used heavily to actually influence, seriously influence people. So I think it's something actually serious. That's my personal opinion.
That was a good digression. Okay, thanks. Also, is Tanvi open to the public, right? Is Tanvi
yes.
Yes. Yeah. Great. Okay, Preslav, you can present, and I guess we should quickly wrap up though.
Yep. So let me okay. So I'm sharing my screen. I want first to just for a second to come back to Tanvi to tell you about something else. So something in addition to the system Tanvi that you can access at www.tanvi.org, we also have a browser plugin that you can also install. And if I click, for example, here I'm on the BBC website, I can ask, learn more, and basically I'm getting to the media profile for the medium. And if I'm reading something else, I don't know, maybe I'm reading Fox News, right? So it's the same thing. I can just go here and, on the, in the browser plugin, and I can get to the media profile for the Fox News, which actually allows you, as you're reading normally the news, to get some background information on the source, to see, that, what is their stance, for example, on coronavirus. You see that Fox News is quite conservative, which means that they're not so kind of concerned about the coronavirus. They're more concerned about the economy and things like that. And another thing that we have APIs to the system so that you can actually, if you give an article, we can tell whether it's propaganda or not. This is the thing that Giovanni was talking about. The other thing is if you give us an article, you can extract the specific propaganda techniques. This is the sentence level, kind of the span level thing that Giovanni was talking about. We have a bias left, center, right for an article. We have check worthiness. This is the thing that I talked about. If you give it an article, it's going to tell you if there are claims that it have been previously fact-checked. Okay, actually, sorry, this is this. And he is going to tell you what are the most check-worthy claims. This is something that is helping journalists and fact-checkers to focus on the most interesting things that are likely to be false. And I'm stopping with this, and I'm switching to the very last.
I think we lost your voice. Hello, I think we lost your voice. Giovanni, are you there? Maybe you can take over from Preslav. Preslav, we can't hear you.
You hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now, yes.
Okay. I don't know, something happened. Okay, so I'm... Okay, sorry, I shared my screen instead of the... Sorry, just a second. I need to share the slide. Do you see my slides?
Yeah, we do.
Okay, so this is a brand new work that we started recently. We are looking into, this time, into social media, and this is something that goes beyond MB. It kind of includes a larger team from the Arabic Language Technologies group here in the Qatar Computing Research Institute. We are looking into fighting the COVID-19 infodemic, and we are looking into analyzing tweets from different perspectives, putting together the perspective of journalists, of fact-checkers, of social media platforms, of policymakers, and the society as a whole. So before we have been talking about factuality, but there are many, many other aspects when it comes to coronavirus. So for example, okay, there are harmless things like jokes. Oh, if coronavirus ever enters Spain, it's going to be through the Barcelona defense. Okay, so okay. Or you have rumors, things like, oh, there are those military helicopters that are going to spray pesticides against corona. And there are conspiracies, oh, the killer Bill Gates, is going to kill us with this mandatory vaccine and stuff like that. There are fake cures. That's a specific aspect, like boiled garlic water is going to cure us from coronavirus. There are other things like xenophobia, racism, prejudices, things like you should not buy Chinese food or Italian food, or you should not buy cucumbers from Iran and stuff like that. And there's panic spreading. For example, oh, there's a zombie apocalypse and Americans are buying guns and stuff like that. And there's blaming the authorities, things like for their action or inaction. Oh, they have done nothing, about the coronavirus, or they have been manipulating measurement, this kind of accusation about the Trump administration. I mean, then there's advice. In some tweets, there's advice to authorities how this should be handled. And there can be a discussion of actions taken. So, for example, so here there's a discussion of what is going on in Germany, that they are gradually returning to normality, and what they are doing is they are doing 1 million tests per week. So here's a call for action. Oh, the government should close all barber shops and salons. Discussing possible cures like chloroquine phosphate. Asking a question, is the coronavirus disappear in the summer? So as you see, those are different categories that could be of interest, maybe to government entities to answer to them, maybe for journalists to fact check, maybe for society as a whole because they are harmful, maybe to social media companies, maybe they might want to take out some of those that are kind of don't align with their guidelines, and they're actually taking down accounts by the tens of millions. They have news about that. So what we are doing is we are collecting tweets, and we have come up with a very detailed guidelines where we're looking into all these aspects, and we are annotating tweets. Are they factual? Are they kind of of interest to the general public? Are they harmful? Should they be fact-checked? But also, are they xenophobic? Do they spread panic? Are they jokes? Are they spreading conspiracies, bad cures, blaming the authorities, discussing action taken, cures, asking questions and stuff like that? And we believe this is something that is of interest to, to different, to many different actors. And we have collected English tweets, obviously mostly from the US, but also from other countries, and also Arabic tweets. And we have a paper freshly posted in archive on April 30th about the fighting COVID-19 from the perspective of journalists, fact checkers, social media platforms, policymakers, and the society as a whole. And yeah, the reason I'm telling you about this is because we want to call for arms for NLP researchers to help fight the COVID-19 disinformation, because we feel that combining all these perspectives is something unique, is very interesting. And we have set up an annotation platform. And by the way, we are doing this, as you said, as you have seen, both for English and for Arabic. We can potentially add it, do it for other languages if there is interest. And so we have a very easy annotation platform based on micromappers, which is something that colleagues here from the social computing groups have been using for years, where you can very easily and very simply annotate different tweets in English and in Arabic. And yeah, we are just asking people who believe in those ideas to help us annotate more. And we are releasing everything that we have publicly on the following GitHub link. And those are the links where people can come and help.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you very much. There are a few questions maybe it'll be good to if you quickly answer. So one was, why does fake news propagate much faster than real news? You mentioned about that early in your talk.
Yes. So why does it? Well, I mean, because it's okay. This is how people's minds work. So it's something that is interesting. It's something that the fake news, they are written in a way, they're using those propaganda techniques, they're written in a way to make us angry, to make us emotional, to make us scared. They can, and this is something that does not really leave us indifferent. And we are actually sharing them. If it's something that is, in a boring, regular style, that's something that we can easily bypass. But the other thing is really getting us more emotional, and we are more likely to spread it further. And social media, they are optimizing for attention. Basically, they have been accused of being part of the problem because their economic model is that they make money when they are keeping the attention of people on their platform, so they can show them more advertisements. And this is kind of part of what gets viral on social media is what actually gets our attention. And this is what social kind of fake news are specifically optimizing for. They're actually doing quite good work. So there has been a study that was showing about the Internet Research Agency, which is like a Russian disinformation campaign that has been exposed on Twitter. And they have been, I have listened to a presentation about that, which was very, very nicely done. They are saying that those bad actors that they're engaged in disinformation, they are optimizing for two things. One is to be maximum viral. This is something that they specifically optimize for. And the second thing is that they are maximum undetected. Okay. And those were excellent in both. And how do you get maximum viral? well, you use those propaganda techniques that Giovanni was talking about. Yeah. But this is actually exactly how we can detect them. Because think about it. There's no way, it's not an option for those actors not to use those propaganda techniques because they are going to sound boring and nobody's going to share them. And they cannot really hide it. I like to say that fake news is like spam on steroids. The difference is that if I send a spam to 1,000 people, it reaches 1,000 people, it dies there. Who is going to share spam? Very rarely. But if I send a viral fake news to 1,000 people, they're probably going to share it further because it's written in a way, you know, to touch them emotionally. And now the difference is also, I mean, this is kind of a key difference, but this is exactly how we can detect them. We can detect them in two ways, and this is what you probably should remember from this lecture. First of all, is where it's coming from. Can we trust this user, right? And this is something that Kareem has been talking about. We have been also talking about how we do this when they have a link to a website. And the second thing is what language is being used there, because it's not an option for those bad actors to actually not use propaganda techniques. If I have a spam filter, I tell you, well, it looks for uppercase letters. You say, big deal, I'm going to stop using uppercase letters, right? It's not a big deal. Nothing changes that fundamentally. But if I tell you I'm looking for the use of propaganda techniques and I have a good tool to detect them, it's not an option for you to stop using it because it's just not going to work. And this is what we have. And I think, yeah.
Good. Okay, maybe this will be the last one. So there's another, just last question would be, but social media, is designed to, to influence the reader in some sense, right? That's the very nature of social media, right? So.
Yeah, that's of course. As I was saying at the beginning, the influence is not negative per se, but I think it's good to be aware of it, and then each person can decide what to do once he's aware of that something is going on, can decide how to act, to react to it.
So yeah, I mean, I want to add to that. I think that another important takeaway from this lecture is about the definition of the terms. I think that's very important. So fake news doesn't have a very clear definition. To some people, it even means it's news that I don't like. Okay, but I like this information because it really puts there two key elements. One is it's false, and second, it means harm. And people have been like misled by the falseness, kind of giving priority to this. But I believe that you should pay really attention to the intention to do harm. Now, the intention to do harm is not so easy. We have been talking to, I mean, when we started working on propaganda, we have been talking to a major fact-checking organization, one of the most influential in the world, and we have been telling them, you do this kind of propaganda analysis, and they're like, propaganda, good work proving intent. And of course, they were absolutely right. Now, we cannot really prove intent, but I mean, you can look into the use of the specific propaganda techniques. You can detect. So it's like, if you have a disease, I cannot tell for sure that you have a disease, but I can look at the symptoms. So if you have the disease, you have to have those symptoms, right? And kind of you reason in the reverse direction. Now going back to propaganda, propaganda also has two key elements. One is that you try to convince people of something, and the second is to do it on purpose. But it's very important, this is something that Giovanni has stressed, is that propaganda is not good, it's not bad. It's not part of the definition, and it's not true, it's not false. It can be true, it can be false, it can be good, it can be bad. I mean, they can be like a propaganda with real terms by the government to vaccinate your children against this, disease. And this can be seen as positive and as true.
Okay, great. Thank you. We still have one more. The panel is on Monday, and I really hope you'll join for it. So thank you very much.